Let's talk about teaching your toddler to share. Now, every parent understands the complete frustration that can sometimes come with trying to get your toddler to share these things. But in a sense, this difficulty in sharing is a good indication because it points to the fact that your child is starting to develop his own identity and also starting to form attachments. Now, as a society and as adults, we understand the value of sharing. We know that it just helps us to utilize our resources most effectively. It helps us really to maintain peace and harmony. And for our little ones, we know that it can help them navigate social situations with a lot more ease, but it's not something that comes naturally at this stage. Before the age of about 5 or 6 years, children haven't fully developed the capacity to have empathy and to understand how other people might think or feel. So in very practical terms, for young children to share, it really is a little bit more about conditioning and teaching and repeating than really for them being able to fully appreciate the value of sharing. They only really understand why it's important as they get a little bit older. So what do you do? How do you help your little one to share? For toddlers, I think it's very important not to expect too much. Very often, successful sharing will depend very much on what is being shared and what mood your child is in and who they are expected to share with. Because to be honest, sharing is often a power struggle and children might be a lot more inclined to share with a younger child or a less demanding child, and also when they don't feel forced to have to share. And then decide on what is to be shared. So we all possess certain items that are really precious and sacred to us. And I think it's important not to force your child to share his most treasured toys and his most treasured possessions with others. Also think very carefully. So we often teach children that sharing is caring. It's a term that comes up a lot, but there might be some things that we don't necessarily want our children to share. Things like, is it okay to share straws and plasters and brushes and use tissues with other people? So teach them what to share, and then perhaps also sometimes it's okay to enjoy a special treat all by yourself. You don't always have to share everything. Know your child's learning style and sharing style, so it's important to observe your child in social situations. If he generally tends to grab things from other children, you might want to teach him not to do it. But also, if your child is a child who is sharing too readily, you might find that he's actually losing out every now and again. It then might be important to also teach him to be a little bit more assertive. Generosity for me really is the key to sharing. So quite often before we even try and teach children about sharing, try and teach them about being kind. Teach them that we should be nice to others, and then they can begin to understand the concept of sharing. It's also very important to plan ahead as far as you possibly can. So successful sharing during play dates might need a little bit of engineering and social engineering from the parent's side. So the first thing you want to do is maybe make sure you put away all those very precious toys and the things that your child really considers his special things. And also remember that novelty is your friend. Children so often, especially toddlers, are so interested in a new toy, something they haven't seen before. So perhaps you can invite your child's playmates and ask them to bring some of their toys along with them. And in this way, each child gets to really play with a toy that's relatively new to them. And then also, you might want to have a special treat or two that you can use just to distract children if the sharing thing doesn't go so easily and the wars begin. You also might want to give children something to share. So initially it might be very difficult to share their own possessions, but teach them about the concept. So you might want to give them spoons, flowers or napkins or sweeties, and ask them to go around the room handing one to each person. That's a nice way to just solidify the concept. And then also, you can play a game like give or take. So this is something I find that we very often do very naturally with little babies. You might find yourself sitting with a child and they hand you a toy and you take it and then give it back to them again, and they'll take it and give it back to you, and repetition, repetition, repetition. But this back and forth exchange will help your child to understand that sharing an object doesn't necessarily mean that it's lost to them, but might come back their way again. It's very important to try and teach patience. So I find one of the biggest difficulties in trying to teach children to share is that they don't understand, they don't have the capacity to really understand what it would mean if you say when someone is done with something. For them, that feels like it's ages away. So instead of saying when your brother is done with the toy, rather set a very specific time. So say, okay, your brother is going to play with this toy for 10 minutes and then it's your turn. And I find it's actually quite effective to set an alarm so that when your child hears that alarm sound go off, they know it's their turn to have the toy. Also a difficult one, but try to resist the urge to intervene immediately, because squabbling about toys is a very important learning opportunity. It teaches children negotiation skills and it teaches them how to resolve conflicts. So try to only really get involved if the situation is deteriorating entirely and you see things are going totally out of hand. And as a last resort, you might want to then remove the toy entirely and explain that nobody gets to play with it unless they can share. And I find generally when children are given this choice, they are a lot more open to sharing than totally losing the toy for that time period. And lastly, praise. Lots and lots of praise and positive reinforcement when your child does share with others, whether you had to intervene in the situation or not. Remember, initially we're just conditioning your child, so even if you had to get involved, when they do share, make a big deal out of it. And also then what happens is when your child sees how happy this behavior makes you, they'll be a little bit more inclined to act in a similar way in the future.